Okay, so welcome to Aggression and Engagement. If you have questions during the class, please go ahead and type your questions into the lecture.E-UNI chat, and I'll try to get to them as relevant or as I have time. At the end, we'll have a big question and answer section, and I'll try to address any questions that I wasn't able to previously address. All right, welcome to Aggression and Engagement. In this class, we're going to be talking about the mechanics of aggression in EVE in the various different kinds of security space, high-sec, low-sec, and null-sec. We'll also be talking about the consequences of aggressing different kinds of targets and what that means for you. This is particularly relevant if you plan to enjoy the wonderful nature of PvP, and if you plan to ignore PvP because you can't ignore PvP because this is EVE. EVE is PvP. Alright, so first and most importantly is knowing the security status of the system that you're currently in. So if you take a look at the upper left of your window, you'll see the name of a particular of the system you're in, followed by the security rating of that system, followed by the constellation that the system is in, followed by the region that the system is in. And then below that, you'll also see the nearest celestial for that system, for your current location in that system, and then you'll also see the sovereignty holder of that particular system. So on the system security status slide, you'll see that there are three different systems linked there. Cheziet, which is high security space, Reblier, which is low security space, and then EZA TAC FM, which is null security space. High security space is any system with a security rating of 0.5 through 1.0. Low security space is any system with a security rating of 0.1 through 0.4. And then null security space is any system with a security rating of 0 or less. So in this case, negative 0.2 is a null security space system. Likewise, wormhole space, W space, is all null security space for purposes of whether something is legal or not. So W space is really just a special case of null security space in EVE in general. So the reason that's important is that the system security rating determines in large part what is or is not legal to do in a particular system. It also affects the consequences of what happens when you break laws. Generally speaking, as you go from left to right on this scale, as you go from high security to null security space, the consequences of doing any particular thing become less and less severe in terms of the response from Concord, and it also determines whether or not actions are criminal at all. We'll see more specifically how that works out later on. Next thing you need to know about is your faction standing with respect to the particular faction that controls the system you're in. So if you look back at that previous slide, you'll see that, for example, Cheziet, the Empire faction that owns that system is the Gallente Federation. So your faction standing with the Gallente Federation determines whether you will be welcomed with open arms in that system or shot upon arrival. So the way you check your faction standing is to go to your character sheet and take a look at, so just click on your character portrait in the upper left, and then go to the standings, link on the bottom left of your character sheet. So that's the fifth icon from the bottom, starting with pilot license, combat log, kill right, security status, and then standings is the fifth one. So go ahead and click on Standings, and you'll see that you have two tabs there, the Liked By tab and the Disliked By tab. Your Liked By tab shows you all the factions you have any standing with where the standing is 0.0 or better. Note that having no standing with a faction is different than having 0 standing with the faction. You have no standing at all with a faction that you've never interacted with. So, for example, if you've never talked to the agents of a particular corporation, then you will not have any faction standing with respect to that corporation. Conversely, if you do have faction standing, it happens to be 0, that's just like having a very, very tiny positive faction standing with that faction. If you have a positive faction standing, it'll appear in your liked by list. If you have a negative faction standing, it'll appear in your disliked by list. And you'll see that, by the way, you can have standings not just with respect to factions, but also with respect to corporations, individual agents, et cetera, et cetera. And the same is true for the disliked by. You can have faction standings, corporation standings, and agent standings. So the faction standing rating determines the response from that particular faction's navy when you enter a system. You may often see, for example, in trade hubs, you'll occasionally see announcements from the faction navy saying things like, "Warning, we've received reports of so-and-so, you are a criminal in this space, please leave immediately or you'll be shot," things like that. That sounds scary. You start getting warnings at -2 standing, depending on the security rating of the system you're in, and you start getting aggressed by that faction at you'll always be aggressed by that faction at -5 standing, and you'll be aggressed somewhere between -2 and -5, depending on the security rating of the system. For each 0.1 security rating less than 1.0 that a system is in, your faction standing needs to be 0.5 worse than -2 before you start getting aggressed. So, for example, if we were in a 1.0 system, so a 1.0 security rating system, you would start getting aggressed by that faction's navy at -2 standing or below. If you're in a 0.9 system, you'd start getting aggressed at -2.5 or below, 0.8, -3 or below, 0.7, etc., etc. There is no faction navy in nullsec or low security space, so you never have to worry about getting aggressed by the factions in that particular case. So if you go to the next slide, we're looking at your security status for so your security status, if you go back to the character sheet, your security status is the number next to the security status line. That's the second from the bottom. And if you mouse over that number, so it says you'll have it to probably 1 digit of precision. If you mouse over the security status, you'll get it to 4 digits or 5 digits of precision, depending on your particular security status at the time, and that'll give you a more precise measurement. If you then go to the security status entry on your security status entry on your character sheet, which is the 4th from the bottom, you'll see a history of all your security status changes. If you have aggressed someone, you'll, for example, lose security status in low security space if it wasn't legal to aggress them, or if you've killed pirates, you'll see your security status increase, and so on. I mostly live in nullsec right now, so my security status just keeps going up because I kill NPC rats and run sites and things like that. So if you mouse over any particular item there, you'll see the more detailed version of that status. And if you click on the details, if you right click on an entry and you details, it'll tell you why you got the security status change. So for example, here's one example from my own character sheet. So there you'll see that when I right-clicked the entry on 7/11/0447, that tells me that I got reward for killing pirates belonging to the Serpentis Corporation. So my security status went up because I killed some NPC rats in a combat site. So your security status determines in part the response by Concord to actions that you take in a particular system, and also whether or not it becomes legal to engage. The most important threshold to know about is that your security status is below -5. You become engageable in any security system. That's only actually relevant outside of null security space because there are no consequences for engaging in null security space. But if you enter, for example, high security or low security space, people will be able to aggress you without consequence to themselves. And in the different corps have different names for that, but in the E-UNI we call that perma-flashy status. Sometimes you'll also hear it called outlaw status or criminal status. I don't like calling it criminal status because that gets it confused with the criminal timer, which we'll talk about in a second. So generally, if you keep your security status above -2, you will not ever have any problems with factions or Concord, no matter where you travel. And also, just like the Empire factions, or just like Galente and Amara Mimitar and what am I missing? Galente, Amara Mimitar, Kaldari, there are also the pirate factions, and those factions have standings with you too. So the more you blow up a particular pirate faction's ships from, let's say, NPC ratting, the worse they will treat you when you arrive in their home systems and home regions. Okay, so having understood the security status of your current system and your security rating, now it's time to talk about timers, because this is the next sort of big piece of what was introduced in a update a couple of cycles ago. In the Retribution update, there was a new crime system called Crime Watch, and timers were introduced as a way to conceptualize what kinds of activities you were doing. And so there are certain actions which, if you perform them, cause you to get a timer. And I've linked two things in that slide there, so you'll see the actions and timers link and the timer consequences link. Go ahead and open the actions and timers link, which, if for some reason you can't click on it, I've also linked it in the lecture.E-UNI slide, or sorry, lecture.E-UNI class chat room. And we'll get to each of the flags in a second, but I just want to point out a couple of things real quick. Notice that the way this chart is organized, this is from CCP, the way this chart is organized is the things in the green area correspond to the consequences of performing a given action in high security space. Things in the yellow area correspond to performing that action in low security space, and the things in the red area correspond to performing that action in null security space. And again, remember that wormhole space, W space, is considered null security space since its security rating is 0.0 or less. Or in fact, it's -1.0. Okay, so going back to the slide, let's go to the next slides here. The first time we're going to talk about our combat timer. So if you've ever gotten into a fight, which hopefully you have at this point in your EVE career, there are three kinds of combat timers you might encounter. You see a yellow exclamation point. That is a NPC log-off timer. That means you've aggressed an NPC, or it has aggressed you. So it's a mutual timer. If either you or the NPC aggressed, then you get the timer. Technically, the NPC also gets the timer, but that's not really relevant because they're not players. That timer lasts for 5 minutes, and while the timer is active, if you log off while in space, your ship will remain in space. So you'll still initiate normally when you log off in space, your ship initiates an emergency warp, and you'll warp to a point in a random direction 1 million kilometers from your current spot. And then upon relogging in, you would warp back to the spot that you warped away from. However, if you have this timer active, you'll still initiate the emergency warp, but your ship will stay in space until the timer expires. Of course, if you're prevented from doing the warp somehow, like, for example, if one of the pirates has a warp scrambler on you, then you won't be able to initiate the emergency warp at all, and your ship will not only continue to stay in space, but also continue to get shot at. Now this is the Capsular version of that timer. So if you see a red exclamation point, it means that you have been aggressed or you did aggress a player rather than a NPC. And that timer lasts for 15 minutes. It works exactly the same way as the other timer does. So as long as you have it, you will not be able to log off. Your ship will not disappear while in space if you log off. Same as the NPC logout timer, but this time it lasts for 15 minutes. And then finally, the weapons timer is what you get if you aggress not an NPC, but another capsuleer. And aggress in this case doesn't just mean doing things that cause damage. So it includes any module that you, generally speaking, would not want activated against you. So anything that's not a support module that targets another player or which provides an area of effect damage to another player. So smart bombs, for example, will trigger a weapons timer, even though they didn't actually target any particular person. So will shooting your guns at someone. So will applying a web to someone. So will warp scrambling them. So will target disrupting them, etc., etc. Even though some of those things don't actually cause any damage, you may still get a weapons timer. So, for example, in the case of a smart bomb, even if you don't actually, even if you didn't actually hit anything. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, you will still need to hit something to get the weapons timer, but you don't actually need to cause any damage for a weapons timer to get active. So, warp scrambling someone, for example, does give you a weapons timer. While you have a weapons timer, you get 60 seconds, and as you get 60 seconds wherein you cannot go through a gate or dock up at a station. You'll be denied if you try to do that. Note that for purposes of a weapons timer, a wormhole is not a gate, so you can't jump through a wormhole while you have a weapons timer. Paxi Eriker says, doesn't the Capsular Timer also get refreshed by people shooting at you while the NPC timer doesn't? If by people you mean other capsuleers, then yes. A timer is always refreshed whenever the action that would have caused you to get the timer happens again. So if you, for example, get shot by a rat, and then you keep getting shot by NPC rats, that'll keep refreshing the Capsular logoff timer. Likewise, if you keep shooting something that you keep aggressing another player, you will keep refreshing your weapons timer over and over until you stop aggressing them. Okay, next up are the illegality timers. So these are criminal and suspect timers. This is kind of a tautology, but basically you get the suspect timer for anything that is a suspect offense, and you get the criminal timer for anything that's a criminal offense. What is or is not a suspect or criminal offense will be covered a little bit later, so bear with me until then. But there are certain kinds of offenses that are classed as suspect offenses that are considered less serious, and there are certain classes of offenses that are considered criminal offenses, and those are more serious. If these timers last for 15 minutes, if you are in if you're in high or low security space and you have one of these timers, you are engageable, and players may engage you without taking any penalties to themselves. If you happen to be out in space in high security space with a criminal timer active, you will trigger a Concord response. So basically you don't want to undock or otherwise jump into a high security system with a active criminal timer. And again, each of these timers lasts for 15 minutes. The next timer is limited engagement timers. Okay, so this is one of the trickiest parts of the crime watch system, and it's responsible for, I would say, 90% of people dying stupidly because they don't understand all of the aggression mechanics. A limited engagement timer lasts for 5 minutes, and you get a limited engagement timer whenever at least one of the parties in a fight could not have legally aggressed the other party. So, for example, you do not get a limited engagement timer when two war targets shoot each other because it is legal for war targets to shoot each other. But you would get a limited engagement timer if you aggressed, let's say, a person who is suspect in high security space because it is legal for you to aggress them, but it is not legal for them to aggress you. So that is what creates the limited engagement. Limited engagement timers are designed so that it's what makes it legal to continue a fight that otherwise otherwise would not be legal to continue. So, for example, if there was no limited engagement timer, then you would be able to shoot the person who is suspect without them ever being able to shoot you back, because if they aggressed you in high security space, they would go criminal, and they probably. So the limited engagement timer occurs whenever at least one of the people in a fight could not have legally aggressed the other person or anyone else in the same fight. And those last for 5 minutes. Notice, by the way, something very important. The duration of a limited engagement timer is much shorter than the duration of the suspect timer. We'll see how that figures into station games later. And then next, this isn't really a timer in comparison to the others because it's so short, but there's something called a session change timer, which doesn't appear in quite the same way as the others do, but you'll see it as a little circle that looks similar to the time dilation circle, except it's gray, and it appears at the upper left of your screen whenever you have it active. It always lasts for 10 seconds, and it'll be just the upper left of your system name that you're currently in. And you get this session change timer whenever you do something that changes your character's location or changes the ship you're in or the state of your character. So here's a not complete list of all the things that might change your session. Docking, jumping through gates or wormholes, jumping to a Sino, leaving your ship, getting your ship blown up, joining a fleet, dropping a fleet, jump cloning, putting in implants, stopping your skill queue, etc., etc. Any of those things will cause you to get a session change timer. If you do anything that causes you to get a session change timer, you will not be able to do anything else that would have caused you to get a session change timer. So, for example, one reason that people die very stupidly is to be shot on the undock of a station and then to immediately try to dock up. So, having been getting your ship blown up is something that gives you a session change timer, so there'll be a 10-second window where you won't be able to dock up, which is more than enough for someone to lock up your pod and shoot you. So if you get your ship blown up on the undock of a station, you probably want to leave the undock of a station before they're able to lock you up. So hopefully you've got something like a pod saver tab that you can mash repeatedly and warp to a celestial that's out of the way. And then next are kill rights. So if you go ahead and look at your character sheet and look at the third link from the bottom, you'll see kill rights, and you'll see there any kill rights that you have or kill rights that someone else has against you. And the kill rights work as kill rights are awarded whenever you do something, or I should say, get a kill right. Whenever someone does something to you that causes them to get a criminal timer. So if they get that red skull, then that red skull timer, then you will get a kill right against them. And you'll be able to award, if someone activates a right, that person becomes engageable to anyone else for 15 minutes. It basically applies a suspect timer to them for 15 minutes. So it forces them to go suspect for 15 minutes. In exchange, whoever activates the kill right pays a fee to the person who owned the kill right. And that person is able to set the price to activate the kill right. And they also can choose who is allowed to activate the kill right. You can make the kill right available to everyone in Eve, to a specific person, to people just in your corporation, etc., etc. And then you can also decide how much you want to charge for the kill right. If you hope to see your kill right activated, you generally want to calibrate the size of the kill right fee to the type of ship that they typically fly. So you don't want to cost people 100 mil to activate a kill right for somebody who mostly flies frigates, for example, because the chance that they will drop loot worth at least 100 mil is quite low. So typically, the general rule of thumb is 1 million for somebody who's flying mostly frigates, something like between 1 in 10 million for someone who's mostly flying cruisers, battle cruisers, and then something like 10 million and maybe up to 20 is questionable, but perhaps up to 20 for somebody who's flying very expensive ships, faction battleships, that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, I don't think people are going to buy your kill rate unless that person just happens to be caught at a bad time. But 20 million is, I think, the most I've seen people typically pay for a kill rate in high security space. Okay, so next let's talk about engagements themselves. So as we talked about before, get a limited engagement timer whenever one of the following two things happen. You illegally aggress someone in high or low security space. That's the only place where legality of actions matters. Or you legally aggress someone, but they could not legally aggress you. So if either one of those two things happens, in other words, if at least one of the parties could not legally aggress the other, then a limited engagement will be created. Whether it's legal to engage someone or not depends on one of these 5 factors. So if any of these are true, then you are allowed to legally engage a target. So if you have a limited engagement with someone, that makes it legal to engage them. If they have a suspect or criminal timer, then you can legally engage them. If their security status is -5 or less, then you can legally engage them. If they're a war target, or you're at war with their militia, so that's a faction warfare specific case, but if you're at war with their corp or alliance, or if you're at war with their faction, then you can also legally aggress them. Or if you're in a system where the security rating is 0 or less, so if you're in null security space, that's technically, there are no illegal engagements in null security space. Of a special case. But basically, if any of those 5 things are true, then it is legal to engage a particular target. And an illegal engagement is defined as any engagement that doesn't meet one of those 5 criteria. So with that in mind, let's take a look at that link I posted before. So there's this is all the actions that trigger one or more of the timers occurring on you. So let's run through some of the specific cases. So that first group there, notice that if you target a offensive module against a legal player in high security space, you'll get the weapons flag and you'll get what CCP calls the PvP flag in this chart. PvP flag here just means the Capsular log-off timer. So that's the red exclamation point 15-minute log-off timer. So if you shoot someone in high security space and it's legal to shoot them, then you get a weapons flag and you get the log-off timer, but you don't get any suspect or criminal flags, obviously. Likewise, in low security space, also not a problem to shoot people who are legal to aggress, and in null security space, doesn't matter. You still get the weapons and the PvP flags, but you'll never get a suspect or criminal flag for doing something in null security space. If you go to the next line, this is the big distinction between aggressing in high security and aggressing in low security space. So notice that aggressing somebody's ship that's illegal to aggress in high security space earns you a criminal flag, but doing so in low security space only earns you the suspect flag. And in high security space, the criminal flag means instant death from Concord, or not instant, but approximately instant within 30 seconds or so. However, notice that killing someone's capsule in low security space illegally is also still a criminal action. Now, there's no Concord response in low security space, so the criminal flag is more or less equal to the suspect flag, except, of course, that if you go back to high security space with that criminal flag active, then you will trigger another Concord response. So stealing loot from a container is a suspect offense, but unlike aggressing someone, doesn't trigger a security status penalty. So you can loot from containers without reducing your security rating. So activating the smart bomb will give you a weapons flag, but not a PvP flag, unless you hit something. So if you actually hit something with the smart bomb, then you'll get the PvP flag. But just activating it is enough to give you the weapons flag. Just like activating an individual module against them would give you the criminal flag in high security space, so does aggressing them with the smart bomb. And likewise, in low security space, aggressing them with the smart bomb gives you the suspect flag. Then you can see that the pattern kind of repeats for other modules. So you'll be able to. It's a criminal offense to shoot people with ECM bursts. It's a suspect offense to do it in low sec. Some weapons you can't use at all in high or low security space, so you can't launch bombs in high or low security, only in nullsec. You can't put up interdiction spheres or use your warp disruption field generator in high or low security space, only in nullsec. But again, you'll always get the weapons in. If you would have gotten a weapons or PvP flag in high or low security space, you'll always get it in null security space too. The only thing you won't get are the suspect and criminal timers. Okay, if you scroll down to the bottom two blocks there, the targeted assistance and the drone assistance blocks, I want you to notice two interesting things. So targeted assistance means supporting another player with modules like remote sensor boosters or armor reppers or shield reppers or anything that would otherwise enhance a player's ability to fight or repair them in some way. So those are called the targeted assistance modules. Whenever you activate a targeted assistance module against another player, you get all of the flags that they do with the same timer that they do. So if you get, so in other words, if you decide to shield rep a criminal in high security space, you will get exactly the same criminal flag as the person who originally had the criminal flag with the same timer. So if you rep someone who has a suspect timer with 12 minutes to go, then you get a suspect timer with 12 minutes to go. You also get the same flags that they do even if you didn't actually activate any weapons. So for example, if they shot someone and they have a weapons timer and you help them out, then you get the same weapons timer they do, even if you never actually shot anything. Likewise, you get the PvP flag and criminal and suspect flags. Drone assistance works exactly the same way. If you help your drones on someone, if you assign your drones to someone and they engage a target that that person is also engaging, then you're going to get the same timers that they do too. And then this last line, look at this very last line, the targeted assistance against another player in a limited engagement. This is another big source of why people die stupidly in high or low security space. If you target another player, so if you rep someone, for example, or you remote sensor boost them, and that player is in a limited engagement, and you are not also in a limited engagement with all of the pilots that that person is in a limited engagement with, then you go suspect. So as an example, if Alice and Bob are shooting each other, and Alice has a limited engagement with Bob, and it was perfectly legal for Alice to be aggressing Bob, if Carol then comes along and Bob is her corp mate, let's say, and Carol decides to shield rep Bob, then Carol's going to get a suspect timer because she doesn't have a limited engagement with all of the people that Bob does, namely Alice. So because Carol doesn't share all of the same limited engagements that Bob does, Carol will go suspect. That means that anybody can shoot Carol now. So that would be a really bad move on the undock of a trade hub, for example, to go suspect that way. And of course, because Carol activated her targeted assistance modules, Carol would also get all of the same flags that Bob did. So for example, if Bob had been shooting Alice, then he probably has the weapons flag, and he probably has a PvP flag. So that means Carol is going to get the very same weapons and PvP flag, which will prevent her from docking when she tries to shield rep. Bob. Okay, so one more thing to note, and then we'll move on to the next slide. One more thing to note is the security status penalty column there. Some of those say yes. Take just a quick note. The lines that say that you do get a security status penalty in high and low sec, because those are the things that are going to activate sentry guns when you're on grid with them. And we'll talk about sentry guns in the very next slide. Basically, you'll get a security status penalty for aggress isn't legal to aggress. But you won't get a security status penalty for stealing loot from a container, and you won't get a security status penalty for from helping someone with a limited engagement. Okay, so pop back to the presentation and take a look at the next slide after illegal engagement. Go to sentry guns. So remember that column from before, the security status penalty? If you take a security status hit while you're on grid with a sentry gun, you will draw aggression from the sentry guns. The way sentry guns work is they keep a list of all the people who have illegally aggressed, who have taken a security status hit in their presence and which are still on grid. And they keep an internal list of that. And and then they switch targets every 30 seconds to a random person on that list, which could be the same person from before. And they'll keep doing that for as long as you're still on grid, or for 15 minutes from the last time they aggressed you, whichever happens first. So if you leave grid, that will make them stop shooting you when you return, or if you somehow are still on grid for 15 minutes without being shot by them, then they'll also forget about you. So sentry guns have a 300 DPS volley that's about 1/3 kinetic, about 1/3 explosive, and about 1/3 EM thermal. So that means they're close to omni damage with a focus on kinetic and explosive. So they're especially bad for armor tanked frigates, for example. 175 DPS is like having one extra frigate shooting at you at medium to full strength. So that's just a sort of frame of reference for how much damage they're going to do. It's like having one more frigate attack you in their presence. That's per sentry gun, of course. So if you aggress on a station with 6 sentry guns on it, then you will be getting 6 frigates worth of DPS applied to you. Sentry guns switch targets like you said, every 30 seconds, and they have very good range from each other. Typically, the range of a sentry gun is at least 150 kilometers. CCP fudges a little bit and says that sometimes it's the length of a grid and sometimes it isn't. There is speculation about where that's true and when it isn't true, but for almost all purposes, if you're on grid with a sentry gun and you illegally aggress, you will be shot by it. So you will probably not want to illegally aggress players in a frigate, because a sentry, or at least not on a gate or a station where sentry guns are found, because that extra DPS is probably going to nuke you pretty quickly. The smallest ship in which you can safely tank sentry guns for an extended period is probably a cruiser, perhaps maybe a really over-tanked destroyer or something like that, but I wouldn't recommend it. Okay, and then if we look at the other link that I posted on that slide, which I've linked in lecture.E-UNI if you don't want to scroll back. So that first link talked about the which timers you got. This link talks about what happens when you have that timer. So just as a quick refresher, getting the weapons timer, again, means that you can't jump through a Stargate or dock at a station for the duration of a timer. You also can't eject from your ship. You can't switch to a new ship. If you're at a pause, you won't be able to swap your ship into a hangar. You won't be able to do anything that causes you to change what ship you're in, basically. Again, the weapons timer does not prevent you from going through wormholes, so it is not an exploit if you aggress someone on a wormhole and are able to jump through. The PvP flag, again, that's just the one that prevents you from logging off. Just like the non-capsular lock-off timer, the capsular lock-off timer is 15 minutes, and it will also prevent you from locking off, so your ship doesn't prevent you from locking off, it prevents your ship from disappearing in space, which is bad if there are people around who can probe you down, because then they can warp directly to your ship and kill you while you're locked off. The NPC lock-off timer right below that works exactly the same way. The criminal timer is the stronger version of a suspect timer. All the suspect timer does is make you engageable. The criminal timer not only makes you legally engageable, but also means that Concord will spawn in HiSec and try to kill you. Anything that would allow you to kind of leave the system or leave the grid that you're currently on will be impossible in high security space, and trying to avoid Concord in high security space is considered an exploit. So if you somehow do not die after getting a criminal flag, that is a bannable offense. The criminal flag in low security space is pretty much the same thing as the suspect flag. The only difference is that you'll be attacked by sentry guns if you do it in sight, if you do the action that caused you to get a suspect flag in sight of them. Okay, so that covers the basics of the aggression mechanics. We're going to go into a pop quiz mode for now. I'm going to just scroll up really quickly and address some of the questions that people had, and then we'll go to the pop quiz. Let's see. Selnath Umair asked, is there any benefit to positive high security status other than not being shot at? The benefit is that you can aggress more people before you need to get your security status rating back up higher. But if you mean, is there a big difference between having 0.1, 5.0 security status? No, not really. Nestor Zephylim asked, are cargo expanders safe? I don't know if I understand what that question means. Maybe. Oh, I see. I did not get that joke, I'm sorry. Ballarat asked, if a fleetmate opens fire, say, in nullsec, and is repped by a logi in a cap chain, does the whole logi group in the cap chain then get an aggression timer for 50 seconds? If a fleetmate opens fire. So, if you apply a targeted assistance module, so you're asking whether applying a targeted assistance module to someone in nullsec gives you the weapons flag. You can just consult that chart to see that the answer is yes. So if you look at the targeted assistance against a player with a weapons flag line, you'll see that in nullsec you do get a weapons flag. So you'll not only get a weapons flag, but you'll probably also get a PvP flag. So if you rep someone who is shooting someone else, you will also get all of the flags that they do. In fact, you could actually get the criminal or suspect flag from someone in. Actually, I'm not sure about the corner case. If you got a criminal or suspect flag while in low security space or high security space, and you jump into null, and then your logi reps you, I'm actually not sure what happens in that case. I think that you will still get the weapons and PvP flag. I actually think the suspect and criminal flags will not transfer. Nestor Zephylim asked, does just being in a fleet with someone who acquires a timer have an effect on your timer? No, your fleet status with someone in no way affects the timers that you get. Okay, it looks like I addressed all the questions. So let's go to the pop quiz. So the pop quiz is going to be multiple choice, and I'm going to present a scenario, and then each of you will type a number corresponding to the choice that you think represents the correct answer. Please wait for all of the answers to be stated before you type anything into the lecture.E-UNI chat, and this way we'll be able to see how many people got it right, how many people got it wrong. There's no score. We're not going to be keeping track or anything, but it's just a good way to confirm or deny whether you think you've understood the aggression mechanics correctly. So just as a warm-up exercise, let's take the very easy case of imagining that Alice and Bob are in Cheetah, which is a high security system. So Alice and Bob are in Cheetah on the undock of the Cheetah Trade Hub station. That's Cheetah 44. And Alice and Bob are neutral with respect to each other. Shoots Bob. Put a 1 if you think Alice gets neither the suspect nor criminal timers. Put a 2 if you think Alice gets the suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Alice gets the criminal timer. Okay, very good. The correct answer is 3. Okay, so that was pretty easy. Let's try something slightly different. This time, Alice and Bob are both sitting on the undock of G to 4-4, just like before. This time, Alice and Bob are neutrals with respect to each other. Alice challenges Bob to a duel. Bob accepts the duel invitation. Alice shoots Bob. Put a 1 if you think Alice gets neither the suspect nor the criminal timers. Put a 2 if you think Alice gets a suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Alice gets the criminal timer. And again, please wait for all of the answers to be stated before you put any of your choices. Right, because Alice and Bob had a duel, they have a limited engagement with each other. And because they have a limited engagement with each other, it will be legal for them to aggress each other, so there is no suspect or criminal timer involved. Okay? Next scenario. Alice and Bob are sitting on the undock of Gita. Alice is a suspect. Alice has 30 seconds left on her suspect timer. Bob shoots Alice. Put a 1 if you think it's legal for Bob to aggress for less than 30 seconds from now. Put a 2 if you think it's legal for Bob to aggress less than 15 minutes from now. Put a 3 if you think it's legal for Bob to aggress less than 5 minutes from now. And by aggress, I mean aggress Alice. Ah. Yes, I see that many of you would now be dead. So the correct answer is that because Bob shot Alice, and because it was not legal for Alice to shoot Bob, remember Alice is a suspect, that means that a limited engagement was created. That means that Alice and Bob have a limited engagement with each other, and that limited engagement lasts for 5 minutes. So it's not the duration of Alice's suspect timer that matters, it's the duration of the limited engagement between Alice and Bob. It is legal for Bob to aggress Alice for up to 5 minutes from now, unless and until if Alice came out at some future point before 5 minutes was up, then that would have been the timer. So the correct answer was 3, 5 minutes or less from now. This is a very common mechanic that you'll see people use at trading hubs, where they'll wait until their suspect timer is just about to expire within the last 30 seconds or so. They'll undock in something that looks relatively weak, like maybe an assault frigate or maybe a frigate or something like that. And then they'll wait until you shoot one volley at them while they stay within the docking ring. And if you shoot them, you've created a limited engagement. And then that means that they can come out in something much more dangerous, and they can shoot you when their suspect timer expires, and you will not be able to get any help from anyone else because only you have a limited engagement. Okay, so next up, let's imagine that Alice and Bob are now sitting on the undock of Dudrada's RMS station. I've linked Dudrada there for you. So Alice and Bob are sitting on the undock of RMS in Dudrada. And Alice and Bob are neutral with respect to each other. Alice shoots Bob. Put a 1 if you think Alice gets neither the suspect or criminal timers. Put a 2 if you think Alice gets the suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Alice gets a criminal timer. Notice that Dudreda is in low security space. So if you click on the Dudreda system, you'll notice that its security rating is 0.3, which puts it in low security space because low security space is between 0.1 and 0.4 security rating. So that means that shooting someone's ship is a suspect offense and not a criminal offense. So if you said criminal offense, that would be true if Bob was in his pod, but if Bob was in his ship, then he would get a suspect offense. Alice definitely doesn't get no flag. She will always get at least a suspect flag. So imagine the same scenario. Alice and Bob are sitting on the undock of the RMS station in Dudreda, and Alice aggresses Bob. Alice and Bob are neutrals with respect to each other. Put a 1 if you think Alice does not get aggressed by sentry guns. Put a 2 if you think Alice does get aggressed by sentry guns. All right, very good. Alice does get aggressed by sentry guns because shooting Bob is an illegal action, as we saw from the previous question, because it was not legal for Alice to aggress Bob, and because it wasn't legal for Alice to aggress Bob, she will take a security status hit, which means that the sentry guns will open fire on Alice. All right, let's go back to high security space. So imagine we're sitting on the undock of the trade hub in Rennes now. So there's the Rennes system. Rennes is, as you can see, it is a high security space system with a 0.9 security rating. And Alice and Bob are sitting on the undock in Rennes. Bob is a suspect. Alice shoots Bob, a suspect. Carol, who's in Bob's corporation, Carol comes along and starts shield repping Bob. Put a 1 if you think put a 1 if you think Carol gets a weapons timer. Put a 2 if you think Carol gets a weapons and a PvP timer. Put a 3 if you think Carol gets a PvP timer. Or put a 4 if you think Carol gets either the weapons nor the PvP timer. So 1 for weapons timer, 2 for weapons and PvP timer, 3 for PvP timer, or 4 for neither weapons nor PvP timer on Carol. Okay, so remember, Alice shot Bob, right? So Alice will have a weapons timer. Bob hasn't shot back yet, so Bob doesn't have a weapons timer. So when Carol reps Bob, she gets his PvP timer, but she doesn't get any weapons timer because Bob hasn't actually shot Alice yet. So the correct answer was that Carol gets only the PvP timer and not the weapons timer, because there is no weapons timer to acquire. So that means that it is safe so that means Carol will be able to dock up immediately as long as Bob doesn't aggress. Right, she does get all of Bob's timers, but Bob doesn't have a weapons timer because he didn't shoot yet. Okay, so Alice and Bob, same situation. Alice and Bob are on the undock of Rennes Booter Tribe Treasury, the trade hub. And Bob is a suspect, and Alice shoots Bob, and Carol comes along and reps Bob. Put a 1 if you think Carol gets neither the suspect nor the criminal timers. Put a 2 if you think Carol gets the suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Carol gets the criminal timer. That's right. Carol will get all of the timers that Bob has, and because Bob is a suspect, Carol will also get the suspect timer, and that means that Carol will go suspect. The reason Carol goes suspect here is because, notice that the specific reason Carol goes suspect here is because Bob is a suspect. So remember that for this next question. All right, Alice and Bob are sitting on the undock in Judreda. Alice and Bob have a limited engagement with each other. They accepted a dual limitation, but they're otherwise neutral with respect to each other. And they're fighting. Both Alice and Bob have shot each other. Carol comes along and starts repping Bob. Put a 1 if you think Carol gets neither the suspect nor the criminal timers. Put a 2 if you think Carol gets a suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Carol gets a criminal timer. I hope none of you are in Carol's role for the people who said 1, because Carol will have a suspect timer, even though Bob is not a suspect. So she won't pick up Bob's suspect timer because there is no suspect timer from Bob, but she will get a suspect timer because she applied a targeted assistance module to someone that she did not have a limited engagement with. So Alice and Bob have a limited engagement with each other, but Carol doesn't have a limited engagement with with Alice. So when Carol reps Bob, she's repping someone who's in a limited engagement that she's not also in a limited engagement with. So that means that Carol goes suspect as per that last line on the chart. Cyrano, Bob being in her corp has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not Carol would go suspect. Nestor Zephylim asks, and then anyone can shoot her. Yes. Now that Carol has a suspect flag, because she is suspect, it is legal for people to aggress her. Dow Aetolian asked, are there any docking, jumping, etc. restrictions for limited engagement flag specifically? Nope, nothing about the limited engagement flag prevents you from doing anything. It just makes you legally aggressible by all the people that you have a limited engagement with. Okay, so for this, let's turn back to low sec. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Let's stay in high sec. So we're in Rens. Alice and Bob are sitting at the undock in Rens. Alice activates a smart bomb. Alice and Bob have a limited engagement with each other. Alice's smart bomb only hits Bob. Put a 1 if you think Alice gets neither the suspect nor the criminal timer. Put a 2 if you think Alice gets a suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Alice gets a criminal timer. Okay, the correct answer is that Alice would get no timer. She would not get, she would get a weapons timer, but she would not get the suspect or the criminal timers for just hitting Bob. Now, that's really unlikely that she'd be able to do that successfully on the undock of a trade hub, but nonetheless, in this particular case, Alice would not get the suspect or the criminal timer. She only hit Bob. It's legal for her to shoot Bob, so that's okay. However, one small niggle there, Alice will need to have her safety set to red to actually activate the smart bomb. Because in theory, Alice could get the criminal timer if she activates the smart bomb and hits someone. So the game requires that your safeties be on red to actually activate smart bombs in space. I'm sorry, at least in high. or low security space anyway. Okay, so let's imagine that same scenario. This time we're in Dudrada again, and Alice and Bob are sitting on the undock of the Voodoo Tribe Treasury Station the RMS station in Dudrada. Alice activates her smart bombs, and she hits Bob's ship. Put a 1 if you think Alice gets neither the suspect nor the criminal timers. Put a 2 if you think Alice gets a suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Alice gets a criminal timer. Everybody who said suspect timer is correct. The shooting people's ship in LowSec is a suspect offense, not a criminal offense. So if you said criminal offense, it's wrong for that reason. If you said no timer, it's probably because you thought I said that Alice and Bob had a limited engagement, but I didn't say that. That was only for the last time. Okay, so next, imagine that Alice and Bob are sitting on the Dudrada RMS undock. Alice shoots Bob and blows up his ship, and Alice shoots Bob's pod as well. Put a 1 if you think Alice has neither the suspect nor the criminal timers. Put a 2 if you think Alice has a suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Alice has a criminal timer. That's correct. The right answer is 3 because Alice shot Bob's pod, and illegally shooting someone's pod in low security space is still a criminal offense, just like it is in high security space. All right, this time Bob is a suspect, and Alice and Bob are shooting each other on the RMS undock in Dudrada. Again, Dudrada, so low security space. Alice shoots Bob, blows up his ship. Alice shoots Bob's pod. Put a 1 if you think Alice gets neither the suspect nor the criminal timers. Put a 2 if you think Alice gets the suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Alice gets the criminal timer. Remember, Bob is a suspect, so it is legal for Alice to shoot him. So because, remember, it's only an illegal aggression on someone's pod that causes you to get the criminal timer in a low security space. But if Bob is a suspect, it is quite legal to shoot him. So Alice gets neither the suspect nor the criminal timers. Okay, let's imagine we now are in low security space, and we're fighting on a wormhole in low security space. So we're fighting at the entrance to a wormhole in low security space. Let's just say there's a wormhole in Dudrada, for example. And Alice aggresses Bob. Put a 1 if you think Alice can jump immediately through the wormhole. Put a 2 if you think Alice needs to wait 60 seconds or less to go through the wormhole. Put a 3 if you think Alice needs to wait, put a 2 if you think Alice needs to wait at least 60 seconds to go through the wormhole. Put a 3 if you think Alice needs to wait at least 5 minutes before going through the wormhole. The correct answer is that Alice can jump immediately through the wormhole, so she does have an aggression timer, but a weapons timer only prevents you from jumping through gates or docking at stations, and a wormhole is not a gate, so you can jump through wormholes. All right. This time, imagine that Alice is shooting Bob on the Haggler Gate in Dudrada. So Alice is sitting on the Hagular gate in Dudroida, and so is Bob. And Alice shoots Bob. Put a 1 if you think Alice can jump immediately through the Stargate. Put a 2 if you think Alice needs to wait at least 60 seconds. Put a 3 if you think Alice needs to wait at least 5 minutes. Right, very good. I see one person put 3. The right answer is 2, that Alice needs to wait 60 seconds for her weapons timer to expire, and then she'll be able to go through the gate. So you'll often hear people ask someone to de-aggress. That means they want you to let your weapons timer run out so that you can escape through a Stargate or dock up at a station. All right, this time, let's imagine a slightly more complicated scenario. You cannot jump through a wormhole if you have you cannot jump through a wormhole if you have a criminal timer in high security space, Ballarat. And in fact, even trying to do that would be considered a bannable offense. Okay, so this time, Alice and Bob are in Reblier, sitting at the 6-tack C gate in Reblier. So Alice and Bob are sitting at the 6-tack C gate in Reblier. Alice and Bob are neutrals with respect to each other. Alice shoots Bob. Alice waits. Yes, Angus, they're in Reblier on the 6-tack C gate in Reblier. So Alice and Bob are sitting at the 6-tack C gate in Reblier. Alice and Bob are neutrals with respect to each other. Alice shoots Bob. Alice waits 60 seconds for her aggression timer to expire, and then she jumps into 6-tack C. Bob pursues and hops into 6-tack C. So in other words, 60 seconds after Alice has initially shot Bob is when Bob is now in 6-tack C with Alice. How many more minutes does Bob have to wait before he can shoot Alice again? Put a 1 if you think it's immediately. Put a 2 if you think it's 5 minutes or less. Put a 3 if you think it's 15 minutes or less. Right, Bob would never have to wait no matter what security space he's in because Alice aggressed him, so at the very least they'd have a limited engagement with each other. Okay, now imagine that same situation. Alice jumps into 6-tack C to avoid Bob after aggressing. Put a 1 if you think. Sorry about that. Put a 1 if you think Alice has neither the suspect nor the criminal timer. Put a 2 if you think Alice has a suspect timer. Put a 3 if you think Alice has a criminal timer. That's right. Alice still has her suspect timer from before. It doesn't expire just because she jumped into nullsec, but it does mean that it won't. If she shoots someone else illegally, well, illegally in big quotes because nothing's actually illegal in nullsec, but she did do something that might have otherwise caused her to get the suspect timer, then she will not subsequently get the suspect timer refreshed. Yes, sniper or wormhole space, but wormhole space is null security space in the sense of the security rating is 0.0 or less. Okay, so this time, let's imagine that sorry, 1 second. Okay, this time Alice and Bob are in Reblier sitting on the Cheziet gate. Alice aggresses Bob. Alice waits for her aggression timer to expire, and she jumps into Cheziet. I'm sorry, someone's converting me. 1 second, let me close all these. Okay, sorry about that. So Alice aggresses Bob, jumps into Cheziet after her aggression timer expires. Put a 1 if you think Alice is concorded. Put a 2 if you think Alice is not concorded. That's right. Alice is not concorded because she only has a suspect timer from aggressing Bob in Reveille. Okay, same scenario. Alice and Bob sitting on the Cheziet gate in Reveille. Alice shoots Bob. Alice shoots Bob's pod. Alice jumps into Cheziet after killing Bob. 1 if you think Alice is not concorded. Put a 2 if you think Alice is concorded. That's right, because Alice's criminal timer, that's the correct answer is 2. Alice's criminal timer will still be active because she shot Bob's pod, which gives her a criminal timer because it wasn't legal to aggress Bob. And having had that criminal timer, when she jumps in, she will be concorded. Cyrano Buckminster asked, but if she has a criminal timer, yes, she could jump into high security space. It's not the criminal timer that prevents you from jumping into high security space. It's the weapons timer. The criminal timer would prevent you from leaving high security space. It would prevent you from leaving while you're in high security space with the timer. Ballarat asked, could you live for 60 seconds through the aggression timer to jump? Well, in this case, Alice shot Bob, and he's dead, so she doesn't have any more DPS coming at her except from the sentry guns. It says you can't jump through a Stargate for a criminal timer. I think pretty sure that's only for high security space, not for low security space. So remember, Alice is in Reveille, and then she jumps into Cheziet. So once she's back in Cheziet, then she won't be able to leave because Cheziet is high security space. Reveille is low security space, so she'll be able to jump into Cheziet, just not back once she's in there. Sniper Skype asked, can you evade Concord through LS to bring your ship to a friendly system? I don't know what LS is. But the correct answer to anything that says, can you evade Concord, is no. You can't. You can never evade Concord if you are someone with a criminal timer. It sounds like what you're saying, though, is can you avoid Concord by never entering high security space? Sure, you can do that. I wouldn't call that evading Concord. Just never attract Concord's attention if you're not in high security space. Okay, that is all the pop quiz questions I had. Sounds like you guys got the gist of it. I was pretty impressed, especially since I see many of you are relatively new. Now we're going to go to general question and answer. That concludes the main portion of the class. If you have general questions about aggression, timers, engagement, etc., or if you had a question that I somehow missed and didn't get to you, then please go ahead and make sure to type that question out into the lecture.E-UNI chat, and I'll try to get to it in that order. Okay, Ballarat asked, and I'm sorry, before I get to the question, what I would really love is is if you guys could post any feedback you have on the class to the forum thread that's been linked. That would be super awesome. I'd love to hear about what you'd like to see more of, less of, what you liked about the class, what you didn't like about the class, whether you thought it was good or terrible, etc., somewhere in between. I'd love to hear about it. I'm also especially interested in hearing from people who are not in the uni about how we can make our classes better. And I'm obviously also interested in hearing from people who are in the uni too. Okay, Ballarat asks, could you evade a war target in high sec when you have an aggression timer by going into a wormhole? It depends on what you mean by evade. You could go into a wormhole. That has nothing to do with whether or not the person is a war target, of course, and you may find yourself in more trouble than you bargained for by jumping into a wormhole, especially if we don't know where it goes. Certainly escape someone by going through a wormhole, but there's nothing that would stop them from pursuing right after you, of course. Kavaris asks, can non-targeted boosts like leadership skills or boost modules cause along any flags? No, they cannot. In fact, that's one of the reasons why people greatly dislike off-grid boosters or think it's a cheap exploit sometimes. But off-grid boosters do not pass any flags by virtue of their existing or being applied to you. That's why it's very specific about being targeted assistance, and boosts are not targeted assistance, so we don't count for purposes of those flags. Sniper Skite asks, Concord doesn't enter a low sec for a criminal flag. Yes, that's correct. Concord will never spawn in anything other than high security space. In theory, Concord could spawn in a system that was, nope, never mind. I was going to say a system where Concord had sovereignty but was somehow low sec, even though that doesn't actually exist in the game, but that would not apply because then Concord would just be a faction navy in that case. Cavarus asked, I assume on-grid is the same as well, it's just obvious who the booster is in that case. Actually, it's not always obvious who the booster is. Someone just has to be in your fleet to pass boost, but they don't have to be in the same corp or anything. So it's not always obvious who is or is not in the same fleet with someone else, especially in busy areas like trade hubs and so forth. But yes, on-grid works the same way. Ballarat asked, does an aggression timer prevent using a wormhole in high sec? An aggression timer never prevents. Just having an aggression timer in and of itself, the weapons timer, does not prevent you from using a wormhole. If you have something else that would prevent you from leaving, like the criminal flag in high security space, then that would prevent you from taking the wormhole. I just want to be clear that it's not a given that any given system has a wormhole in it, so I would not base your escape strategy if you're shooting someone on the existence of a wormhole being present in that system. Sen Starfire asked, if you are attacked by a war target and in a fleet with non-involved parties, can the fleet members help defend you, or will they be concorded? Okay, well, first, if you were in the uni and that happened, it would actually be, you're not allowed to fleet with people who are not, you're not allowed to form a combat fleet with non-unistas, so that would not actually be legal for uni rules of engagement. But can the fleet members help defend you? If they're not in the same corp, then having fleet status with someone in no way affects whether or not it's legal to engage or not engage a target. So they would basically be treated as neutrals with respect to the war target. So it would be like they were aggressing someone that they weren't allowed to aggress. So if that was in high sec, yes, they would be concorded. If it was in low sec, they would have to get suspects. Aaron Gattaro asked, this is kind of a question for your previous class and this one. There are times I see someone at the top of the trade station in heck, yellow flashy with station guns firing at them. Are they hoping that someone engages them? Having a hard time imagining how that would happen. Are you sure that station guns are firing at them? Because to take a security status penalty in high sec would mean that they aggressed someone, which would mean that they had to have gotten the criminal flag. The only way I can imagine that happening is if they gave targeted assistance to someone who was already a suspect. That would make sense. But yes, in general, if you see someone floating around at the undock of a station in what looks like a easy to kill ship, they're probably hoping that you aggress them, then they immediately dock up, come out on something much bigger after their suspect timer expires, but while they still have a limited engagement, and then they shoot you and try to blow you up if they can. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
Seluna, when you're done, may I please speak with you?
Sure.
Okay.
Other questions, comments, thoughts? Cavaris asked if you are in low sec and you fight somebody who has a suspect flag, the flag expires and before you kill them, okay, it would never be a criminal offense to pod them because you would still have a limited engagement with them, and that would persist that would persist as long as you kept shooting them or as long as they kept shooting you. So a limited engagement would make it illegal to pod them, so it would not be a criminal offense to pod them. Nestor Zephylim asked, can you explain the can flipping you somehow die scenario? Are you talking about station games? Is that what you're talking about, Nestor? Maybe you can just speak up and mumble if you want. You are muted right now, though. Nestor Zephylim says, people were flipping my cans and I somehow I got involved and died. That could not have happened if you didn't, I don't know what you mean by somehow I got involved. If you shot them, then you would create a limited engagement between you and them, and then it would be legal for them to go on and keep shooting you. So if you tried to shoot them, or if you otherwise did something that made you go suspect, then that would certainly cause you to become a legal target. Yeah, so if you aggress them, you'll start that limited engagement. So basically, don't shoot people if you don't want to be involved in a fight with them in high sec. Right, ignore can flippers. Also, if you want to be sure that you cannot go suspect, then have your safety set on green. That won't prevent you from acquiring a limited engagement, so you could still become engageable by a specific person, but at least you won't go suspect. Other comments, questions, thoughts? Just one more reminder, please, everyone, post in the forum thread so I get your feedback as non-unistas, etc. I guess non-unistas will probably have to register for a forum account, which I suppose is kind of obnoxious, but would very much appreciate your feedback. You wouldn't mind giving it?
I think you did an excellent class.
Okay, hold on, let me see. I got a few more questions here. It's just something at the start of a lecture that Cerulean Ice brought up about being aggressed by faction police. Could you please go over this again? Something about faction police will only aggress you if you are -5 to that faction. Let me see if I understand this. Which is you want me to clarify the... Oh, you know what? I don't think I updated this post-retribution. The faction navies only aggress you at -5 or less in terms of your standing. I'm sorry about that. That is a inaccuracy was in the slides. I will fix that. Cavaris asks, so thanks to the limited engagement flag, you're guaranteed to be able to pod any flashy in high or low security space without a security loss or a Concord response. Yes, Cavaris, that is correct. If you have a limited engagement with them, of course, which you would get if you started shooting them. Okay, I think that seems to be all the questions so far. Any other questions going once? Please, please, please post in the forum thread. Please, please, please. So I've linked again in the lecture.E-UNI class chat. Any other questions going twice? And all right, I think that wraps it up. Thanks very much for attending the aggression and engagement class, and we'll see you at a future E-UNI class. So thanks very much for attending. Thanks very much for coming, non-unistas, and thanks very much for coming, unistas. If you have any other feedback that you'd like to leave, again, please leave it on the forum thread. Please don't combo me or send me emails. I get so many of those, and I'll forget all the great thoughts you had. Really, the forum thread would be awesome. All right, thanks, guys.